For the week of October 20th, 2025, we have something quite unusual today. Noman and I are not together, but we're going to separately present to you this week's ImmPulse. We have some interesting topics to discuss today. In addition to the ImmPulse, which we have uploaded this week for you to read, which includes cases and policy analysis, and we encourage you to do so. Today's a special day. Noman and I are going to devote this broadcast to C-12, new legislation which has been introduced in the Parliament of Canada for the purposes of safety and security of Canadians. But embedded in that legislation is the ability to suspend and terminate application classes. And that is very important. For example, Naman, what would you think an application class could be?
Well, we know that there's a lot of discussion right now, for example, talks about huge populations of pending refugee claims, 300,000. A lot of attention on the SUV program. They published a 10-year period of processing, which is hugely different than what you would have seen a year ago. We hear that humanitarian applications could take 10 years. And generally, there's apprehension. We've heard from clients, from stakeholders. This is very unusual. I'm sure you would agree in your career, in my career. We've never seen the system end up in a position like it is now, where it seems like there's going to have to be substantial changes to make sense of the extensive delays that we're facing.
And more importantly, Noman, we've never seen government officials actually admit what the delays are and publish those delays. One would almost think that they're setting us up for changes to the immigration system and getting the public on side to agree that this is not sustainable and they're going to have to use these special tools if and when they are implemented.
So
I should mention that
you may be suggesting, in the way that you've described it, when you publish this level of potential slowdown that's fundamental to the program, that's connected to the economy, that's connected to so many objectives, to cross-border entry, to security, is that a public interest, which is the magical term that we're waiting for a definition to understand what would trigger the application of these powers?
Well, that's a good question. It's to be seen. We know some evidence was provided before the Standing Committee on Immigration in September, and there was a little bit of discussion around the application of these sections. There seemed to suggest that they were looking at more serious situations, fraud situations, things of that nature to apply it to. But I think that was the first thinking. Now a more developed thinking is coming into play. And we know a lot of our immigration law colleagues are discussing about this. We know a number of our immigration colleagues are discussing this in their particular LinkedIn chats. Everyone wondering now, what's the next step of the government? And I guess we can mention, Noman, that we've been sending our own representations up to Ottawa. And when you're faced with a situation where more water is going into the bathtub than the drain allows to leave, then you've got an overflow situation. And I would call this an immigration overflow situation. And so the issue is you can only do two things in an overflow situation. You can either turn off the tap so no more water goes into the bathtub, or you can increase the size of the drain at the bottom so more water goes out. But if you listen to what Prime Minister Carney said yesterday, he was suggesting that immigration needs to be rationalized for the future, and the numbers have to be rationalized in terms of the intake. And I don't think that discussion means increasing levels. Levels are supposed to come down under the previous prime minister for the next 2 years. And the only issue is whether Prime Minister Carney is going to stay with those announced deductions or reductions, or is he going to take the next step and make it more severe? So that question is an open question. And that I'll let you comment on that before we go to the next.
Well, I think it gets more interesting because if you look at the sheer numbers, when you look at work permit holders, study permit holders, people with pending applications, the numbers are somewhere between 2.5 million. And we're talking about potentially, when you look at the numbers that you mentioned, we're going to reductions now of like 230,000 for permanent residents under the economic class. So you have a massive number of people and very limited spots We know that we've got still, notwithstanding these concerns that are floating around politically, you and I both know we've got employers that are desperately in need in certain areas, reliant on foreign workers and highly skilled workers. We also know that we've got an innovation crisis. We're dealing with the need to create more jobs because there's high unemployment. So on one instance, we hear that we have to have a measured immigration program. On another instance, we talk about the possibility of even looking at H-1B policies to attract the best and brightest to Canada. So you've got a number of different competing objectives all happening at the same time. And all I could say is that as a system, we better ensure that we develop a model that picks the right people when you have limited numbers, because that return on investment has to be high. You don't have the luxury of 500,000 and hope that a percentage succeed. We have to be precise now. And I haven't heard any detailed strategies yet as to how we're going to get there.
I call that a surgical selection. You must be able to identify the right people and get them through the system quickly, and the others either remain in the backlog or are eliminated from the backlog. And I think that's the meaning of suspend or terminate
Right.
in the legislation that's coming. Now, when are we going to start seeing the government solution to this problem?
Well, look, I think we're waiting to hear a little flavor in a couple of weeks, November 4th, when we hear the federal budget. That will give us a sense of where
So
things are
the
going.
Prime Minister has indicated that we are going to see the new directions of immigration in the federal budget. Now, normally we would see this in the annual immigration plan. Why would the Prime Minister yesterday tell us we're going to see it in the budget? Because the budget funds the program. And if you're going to talk about spending money, you have to talk about where you're going to spend money and where you're not going to spend money. And if you're going to spend money on a certain type of applicant being attracted and not spend money on other types of applicants like refugee, you basically give some very strong hints as to how they're going to reshape the program when you read the budget. We're asking all our viewers to note in their calendar November 4th. We expect the budget to be announced at the close of business on November 4th, which is usually 4 p.m. And at 4:15 p.m., Noman and I will be leading a live telecast on the budget, particularly immigration directions and making sense of the government policy.
I think there's, just anticipating what we're likely to see. We obviously have a large group of audience that are employers, and it doesn't go as a surprise that we've seen recently, and we'll talk more about in upcoming weeks, some fairly serious penalties. The general environment, and many analysts have said this, there has been a growing anti-immigration sentiment. There isn't room as an employer to have like a soft process when you're dealing with this immigration program, whether it's your policy, your compliance. I think we're going to see enhanced checks for sure from a corporate side. And I would say from an individual side, you have to develop your strategy early and you need multiple contingency plans. I think we're going to see the provinces play a more prominent role in terms of more allotment of space, more redesign of programs. So this is going to evolve quickly. It's going to change. It'll be dynamic for the next year to 2 years. And I think change will be the one constant that we're going to see.
Okay, so this is our first in a series of pre-budget reviews. We're going to talk about this an awful lot because the immigration program depends upon officers being present to process. It depends upon funding at visa offices around the world. And so the budget's the first clue as to what the government's got in mind in terms of numbers and who's coming to Canada. And it's only coming forward on November the 4th.
Stay tuned. Lots of change, lots of developments.
Stay tuned.